Good evening. I will call this meeting to order. This is a special meeting of Woodstock City Council, has been called for the purpose of consideration of the 2022 revenue budget. I will be chairing the meeting in the place of Mayor Birch. The meeting is for information and discussion purposes only. No action will be taken as the revenue budget approval is scheduled for the regular meeting of council on March 17th, 2022. This meeting is being held electronically in accordance with Section 238, subsection 3.3 of the Municipal Act and Section 16.6.24 of the City of Woodstock Procedure Bylaw. This meeting is being live streamed to the city's YouTube channel, and a recording of this meeting will also be posted on the city's website following the meeting. An agenda of the meeting can be found on the agendas, meetings, and minutes page of the city's website. Councillors will be asked to raising their hands in view of the webcam when requesting to speak. If a member of council is disconnected or having technical difficulties, we will take a recess in order to attempt to rectify the issue. If technical difficulties exist that prevent the meeting from continuing, the meeting will be adjourned and reconvene at a later time. If a councillor needs to leave the meeting at any time, they are requested to inform the clerk. I'll ask the councillors to turn on their screens now. Are there any disclosures of interest? Conflict of interest, I'm sure. Seeing none, I will ask the CIO, David Currier, for opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of council. Tonight marks the beginning of council's in-depth review of the 2022 revenue fund budget. This is the second and hopefully last year that we will be doing this virtually. And so as per our normal practice, council will receive presentations from each department of the city. And at the conclusion of that presentation, we will ask the department head to stop sharing the screen so that council can see the broader council on the Zoom session. And we will turn to those pages that are associated with that presentation in the budget, and council will have an opportunity to review each page of that budget proposal. When it comes to a department like we have this evening with Parks and Rec that has multiple divisions, the presentation will cover the full range of the department responsibilities. And then we will circle back to each of the individual pages within that department, and each division manager will be available to address any questions that council has. And with that, Madam Chair, we begin with Human Resources Department.
Yes, we're asking Mr. Crooks will deliver his message from the Human Resources.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay. There we go. Madam Chair, what I'd like to do is to begin with a very brief corporate overview of some of the budget impacts that will be happening within all of our departments. To begin with the negotiated settlements and with council's approval, all the salaries and wages for QP and the admin or non-union group are at 2% effective January 1st. Since we are still currently under negotiations with our fire association, that is being presented at last year's 2021 level. The rest of the benefit costs we see here are a bit of a mixed bag in terms of how they're impacting. And just sort of for council's understanding, this is what the impact will be on the overall budget, not necessarily within each of the departments. And there are a number of factors that drive this. Some are rate increases, some are where there's a maximum, where you're paying the same rate, but there's a higher maximum that would eventually be paid out. And some are even impacted by the number of pay periods within the year. So OMERS actually has not changed. The difference is that 27 pays versus 26 pays, and that has a big impact on OMERS. So this is really just to give council a very high level sight of how some of the budgets would be affected going forward. If we review human resources specifically with respect to last year, we were around $21,000 under budget. As I've indicated here, employee and labor relations was actually over by just about $14,000. Recruitment was under, and you'll see that reflected in the requests this year that we've reduced what we need for recruitment. Conferences and seminars, well, with respect to COVID, I think everyone just took their best guess as to what the end of the year would look like, and unfortunately, it was very much like the year before. Data processing, we're looking at potentially some changes within the HRIS, but as council knows, we've had decided to go a different direction, and we're not going to try to tweak with the old antiquated system we have. Health and safety, unfortunately, that's impacted by our ability to bring people in. And during COVID, there's a number of things we like to do where we bring a specialist in to do a job assessment or analysis. And most of that had to fall by the wayside just due to the impact of bringing somebody in. And consulting services was under, and that's simply a matter of that some of the things that we were anticipating, one of which I'll cover later with respect to the non-union salary grade, we came in a little less than we expected. If you look at the 2022 budget request for the department, we're asking for an increase of approximately $54,000. And that's really being driven by two things. One is the human resources corporate training. And what that is that's an online database subscription. And last year that was actually in the CIO's corporate training budget, but it is something that is exclusively managed and handled through this department. So we decided to recommend that this is now moved over to the human resources corporate budget. And the last one is a bit of an odd one, I will admit. And what it's really we're looking at is, there's no question, we're buying a lot of masks, we're buying a lot of face shields. We bought a number of rapid test kits. That some of the stuff we hope there'll be a point we can not use it so much in the near future, but we're really trying to consolidate. And our health and safety manager has done a very good job at sourcing out a lot of the stuff we're talking about. And that rather than have this spread across the corporation, we've kind of consolidated a lot of this in through this department. And it's something that I think we all sincerely hope that we can delete this at the end of this year and never have to look at it again. Moving on, I'd like to talk to the additions to base. There are two that I'm going to cover. One is specific to this department in terms of the resource needs we need for safety. And the second one is, as I had mentioned earlier, is with respect to the administrative salary structure. So if we could start with the health and safety. And as we're saying, we do need extra resources. This is something that's very similar to what's happening in HR as well, is that we simply cannot keep up with the demand. But perhaps just to provide a little bit of background, the current health and safety manager was hired, and this was a new position near the end of 2009. I believe it was very close to the end of the year, and that was also driven by the understanding that the corporation simply couldn't keep up. And that did make a huge difference to the city. We brought in someone that could have a focus on the program, develop the program, and very, very importantly is having an internal expert that the employees, the managers, the supervisors can turn to help guide them through this area. In terms of history as well, in 2019, council approved a 4-month co-op position. That did prove to be very beneficial. It does help out a lot. But quite frankly, with respect to the level of expertise we're looking at and continuity, we're really not able to accomplish what we need with a 4-month co-op. What's driving this is, if you go back to when the HR manager was hired, we have more employees. We have new facilities, which we never had before. We have more and different types of equipment. And this all adds to our need for training, hazard assessment, procedure development, like sound level testing is something that with new equipment and new facilities is an ongoing process that needs to be managed. The other main driver is that this is a field, like many, where the changes and pressures brought about by legislative changes is common. It's constant. And this doesn't just create a workload within this department. This creates a workload for our frontline supervisors. They need that expertise. They need somebody to be able to help them navigate their way through this. And really, it's got beyond the scope of just what one person could do. I've thrown in, and I don't intend to go through all of them, some of the examples of the legislative changes we're talking about. And a lot of these are very much ongoing. And I'll focus on the young worker training. We do hire a lot of very young people to work in the city. That is an area of focus that we do want the resources to be out there to help the managers, help the supervisors, making sure that we're taking care of these people. There was brand new women's legislation thrown out, and while the training has gone through, it's also is an ongoing issue that we need to be able to manage. And finally, I just wanted to say the strength of the safety program comes from having those resources available that you can focus on prevention, the control or elimination of the hazards. You do it through engineering controls, procedure training. And the key here, though, is we want to have the proper focus. We want to have the resources in place that we're stopping these bad things from happening, from people getting injured, from property being damaged prior to it happening. And really what we want to do is have a healthy, well workforce for all of our employees. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions the council would like to ask Laird about? That's on page 93 and 94. Okay, seeing none, we'll go to the Parks Department, and Brian Connors will do his presentation. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. I will first present the highlights and key performance indicators of the 2021 budget. Then I will cover 2022 in more detail with how each department fared in relation to the budget. I will conclude with an overview of the 2022 base budget in addition to base budget request. So next slide. Okay. 2021 highlights in Parks and Rec. With significant assistance from the engineering department, there now will be lights over the Pittock Dam. Park staff added another 3.5 kilometers to the Sliver Trail system, including switchbacks, benches, and a boardwalk over the wetland area. A recreation facility needs study was completed, which will provide the department and council with clear strategic direction for the next 7 to 10 years. Washroom renewal on the south shore of Pittock Dam will be completed before spring of this year. A new playground was installed close to the entrance of South Burgess Trail System. After not being able to run summer camps in 2020, we were able to run camps under heavy COVID restrictions in 2021. 2 sports fields are under restoration at Cowan Sportsplex. Unfortunately, the weather this fall and winter was so wet that completion will take place in the spring of 2022. I expect that these 2 fields will become exceptional sports fields for our residents to play on, much like past staff field restoration efforts. Half of the downtown Christmas lights were replaced in 2021, with the other half being scheduled for 22. Final tree planting took place at the Southgate Gazebo Gardens, making it a great place for picture taking and outdoor weddings. New forestry guidelines were developed and implemented, making the process clearer for developers and ensuring that the city can maintain its tree canopy while continuing to grow as a city. I have added one headwind to our highlights here, and that is staffing at the student level is becoming a greater challenge. This will be felt by all of Parks and Recreation Department in the coming years, but particularly or acutely in aquatics. The last 2 years, aquatic leadership courses, which are extensive, have not been running at normal levels. And therefore, a lifeguard aquatic staff shortage is anticipated. The aquatic supervisor has recognized this and has been putting in mitigation efforts to deal with the shortage. However, swim classes availabilities may be a problem in the short term. So next slide is our park metrics. So we've added another parkette, raising the number of parks and parkettes in the city to 54. Of our 9 trails, we've added 3.5 kilometers, to our trail system at coming up to 21. And we still have our 69 sports fields and courts, 4 acres of overpasses and corridors, which we maintain, and 12 stormwater management ponds. This is the recreation metrics that we always go through. So foot traffic at Reeves Community Center is, and I'll just let you look at all these numbers, but I'll just quickly go through kind of what they mean compared to 2020, and I'll give you a quick synopsis of where we are pre-COVID. So we're up in foot traffic by 3% over 2020. However, in 2019, we are down over 63%. Youth rentals were down 2.5%. And in 2019, they're down 51%. Adult ice rentals was up 34% in 2020, but 2019 they were down 63%. Southside aquatic lessons were up versus 2020 by 13.5%, but in 2019 they're down 75%. The Southside aquatic rentals or public swims are down 8.5%, and in 2020, and in 2019 they were down by 57%. Lions Pool was actually up 54% in 2020, and it was also up on 2019. The rationale with this is that Southside Aquatic Center was closed in the summer, so that way Lions Pool was able to deal with the customers in the summer. Recreation programs was up 48% over 2020, but down 25% in 2019. Cowan Sports field rentals were down 54% over 2020, and down in 2019 82%. Cowan Park Sportsplex, the hall and gym transition, that really changed our numbers here. Over 2020, when it was still a hall, we're up 130%, and even versus 2019, we're up 7%. So what we're seeing here is we're starting to have a little bit better numbers than 2020. but we are obviously far off our pre-COVID numbers, which we're hoping to get back to in this coming year. So the recreation, basically, we've opened, closed facilities and park assets, and then reopen them again, often being given direction by the province Friday afternoon with the expectation that they're open on the weekend. So Parks has been busy dealing with that, or sorry, Recreation's been busy dealing with that. We've been planning for future programs and rentals with the uncertainty that befalls changing health regulations. And we've been trying to train as much as we can some of our younger forward-facing staff who have to deal with sometimes irate adults who've decided to take pandemic frustrations out on our frontline workers. So that has certainly been a challenge that we hope soon will be behind us. Moving on to grants, it's been a very good year for Parks and Recreation as far as obtaining grants. So we've obtained grants this year over $352,000. 51% of the grants obtained offset capital projects, which are listed below, and 49% offset student part-time operations. So that has actually helped our budget numbers look a lot better than they would have had we not obtained those grants. Advertising has been substantially lowered over the last 2 years, given the lack of foot traffic in our buildings and our closures. That's really no surprise. However, we did see sales of memorial benches increase significantly. So that's a good sign. This is a chart of the overall department and how they did as far as each area. And this is a comparison from 2021 net budgets to 2021 net actuals. The community complex right here is showing that it has a little bit of a loss, but there was another long-term rental that is still to be posted or has been posted, but before I did this chart up, so that will be in the black. But overall, we are being able to maintain our budget in all areas, with the exception of Cowan Sportsplex, which is just slightly in the red. And the reason for this was we have lower youth sport field rentals during the pandemic, and we had to add some costs due to the vaccine passport and having people access the building. So that increased some of our costs there. Next slide. Recreation camps. So as I mentioned, we were able to run a heavily restricted COVID camps. We had to run about 45 students per week, which is well under our pre-COVID numbers. However, all of these camp spots were full. So we were a full camp of 45 for the 9 weeks, with further people wanting to get in. So the demand certainly is there for our camps, which is a good thing going forward. The next slide is special events. Now, I will just touch on the future of special events. Mr. Jansen will cover the special events in the present and what happened in 2021. Special events will come under Parks and Recreation partway through this year. And I'll just read these slides. A search is currently underway to find the next manager of special events. Of note, all normal annual planned events will continue with this current budget, base budget, except for Art in the Park and Cowapalooza. Currently, they're not in the base budget. And then finally, the next manager of special events will be tasked with continuing the process of enriching community building events, both at a large scale and at a neighborhood level. And the final slide I have is the addition to base budget. And this is for some more supervisory help at Cowan Sportsplex. So Cowan Sportsplex is asking for more staffing support. Currently, the building has 1 part-time maintenance staff and 1 part-time front desk staff during evenings and weekends when the building is at its highest usage numbers. The additional staff would put Cowan Sportsplex on par with other public buildings that the city runs. And why the asks are Cowan Sportsplex is anticipating greater growth now that the gym is in and the field use will go back to pre-COVID levels. Cowan Sportsplex will become one of, if not the, busiest facility in Woodstock. Currently, the full-time facility manager gets between 30 and 40 calls per month from staff on evenings and weekends, which is not sustainable. Conflicts are not getting resolved, and emergency situations have been missed. So there's risk management issues here, as well as staff sustainability concerns. So we wouldn't want to ask for more than what we need, but we feel this is a bit of a necessity. So with that, I can take some questions with the overall, or we can go to the page by page.
Thank you, Brian. And I think that the best way is to go page by page. And so we'll start with the first page, page 54, and that's the administration. So if you would like, if there are any questions or if there's anything that you would like to speak to on this, just go ahead. Are there any questions for Brian? Okay, hearing none, we'll proceed now to page 55 and through to 60, and that is the Parks Department. So the first page will 55. Are there any questions there through to anyone from the Parks Department, either Brian or anyone else that might want to answer our questions? Okay, yes, Councillor Schadenberg.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Madam Chair. I guess to Chris Kern or Brian Connors, just to give us a clarification, maybe for those viewing, but also for ourselves, about the one number is trees in parks, but the City Parks Department also handles trees on boulevards. So give us an idea as to where some of the plans are as far as the overall, as the city of Woodstock grows, to be able to maintain that level of trees on boulevards, especially on city streets.
Through Madam Chair to the councillor's question, we do have an account for trees in the parkland itself and not in front of residential properties. So that is where that line comes into effect. And so as trees get removed, replanted, stumps ground out, that's what's going into that budget line.
Any other questions? So we'll proceed to page 56. Are there any questions on that page? Hearing none, we'll proceed to page 57. Are there any questions there? Okay, we'll proceed to page 58. Are there any questions there? Are there any questions now on page 59? Okay, and page 60 is the bottom line. So we'll just proceed now to page 61 and 62, which at the recreation programs. Are there any questions through on page 61? And 62 is just the total. So the next is the arenas, 63 to 64. And this is the civic arena. Yes, Councillor Schadenberg.
Yeah, Madam Chair, my question would be, maybe it's a good news scenario as much as anything else, but the full-time wages from the Civic Center Arena jumped from 96,800 last year to 126 in 2022. What's the, I guess Darren Hall's up here. Darren, what would be the reasoning behind that increase?
Through Madam Chair to Councillor Schattenberg, the increase of that wages is going back to a normal operating season for the Civic of 6 months for the coming year. Knock on wood. What the number you see there was lowered when we did not open the Civic the previous season, so it wasn't operational January, February, March of this previous year.
I guess my follow-up to Mr. Hall, if I could then, Connie. I see a lot of advertising for ball hockey in the city of Woodstock. I'm assuming that's a summer indoor sport. Would that be taking place at the Civic Center Arena if they get the numbers to warrant it?
Correct. The timing of the season and the close of the Civic worked better for them. They wanted to run a complete program there, and the ice wasn't out of the red pad soon enough for them. So it sounds like it is going to move forward, and the registration is, the numbers are good there. So hopefully that is something that will grow even more.
Thanks a lot.
Councillor Accioni.
Wrong button. Sorry about that. Through the chair to Daryl. Actually, you can probably answer this. Equipment repairs. We got a bit of a jump there to 25,000. I'm just curious, are we replacing equipment there? It's on page 63.
No, essentially it's going back to a number that it normally would be for operating 6 months. Your maintenance costs for that time period increase. So there is nothing that would be new or different.
Replacing that. Okay, no, thank you.
Councillor Petter. You had a question?
Yes, just as another follow-up to whoever wants to answer it. How bad is Civic Center in shape right now? I'm just looking for an overall opinion on how long this thing can survive.
I'll go back to, and time flies. I've been here 11 years now, and I can remember my first year here, I had a conversation with our CAO of, in my professional opinion, how long would you be comfortable with the Civic lasting in its current state? And at that time, I looked at things and I said, well, probably 8 to 10 years I'd be comfortable, and we're now in year 11. We do have the plan moving forward of replacement of the Civic in 2024. I think we can meet that timeline. That does not mean that we may, as a stopgap, have to spend money on something large there from a refrigeration standpoint. The floor itself is over 20 years old. There's lots of cracking. There has been a major heave in it 15 years ago, in the southwest corner that is just sand. So I think we can mitigate if something happens, but we would have to potentially spend money on that. It is over 50 years old. And from a function standpoint and an accessible standpoint, it is aged. And reading through the need study, it does reflect that.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions on page 63? Continue to page 64. Are there any questions there? Okay, so we'll proceed now to the Southwood Arena, which is pages 75 and through to 77. Are there any questions on those pages? On 75 first? Okay. 76. Any questions there? And Councillor Schadenberg?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I guess through to Darren Hall one more time. Todd kind of actually the overall assessment of the Civic Center Arena, but what's the state of the roof at the community complex? Of course, it opened in 1996. The Southwood Arena is there, and I know there's money's being put aside for that to be replaced.
Yes, and I off the top of my head, I think you're looking at replacement in 2023. Maybe it might be 2024. I would say the main flat roof of the complex is in good shape. Where you're seeing the age is on the steel sides. You'll see lots of paint peeling off of that, and that is more of a flag need than I would say the top flat roof. So I suspect that will get done in that timeline.
Thanks. I realize it's more of a capital thing than an operating thing, but you're here right now, and we've got maybe some viewers who do it right now.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks a lot.
Are there any other questions on page 77? Hearing none, we'll go back to page 65 and 66. So that's camps. So page 65. Are there any questions there? I guess I had one, and I guess this would be through to Brian. It's the specialty camp. It's 15,000, and I just wondered what that camp is going to be.
Brian, would you like me to answer this question?
Yeah, that would be great, Jason.
Okay, you, Madam Chair, or to answer your question. Every week is a different specialty camp. So sometimes we bring in specialty instructors. For example, we utilize the skate park in Southside Park to do a skateboarding camp and then a BMX bike camp another week. Sometimes it's a STEM camp. So we're doing STEM, we bring in a specialty STEM instructor. Sometimes we use our own instructors in-house that have some specialty. So we have some dance instructors. So we'll do a dance camp. So every week is basically a different theme, but we separate it out on the budgets because we often are using specialty instructors.
Okay, thank you. That sounds interesting. Thank you. Are there any other questions on that page? And 66 is just the total. So we'll proceed now to 67 and 70 through to 71, the aquatics. And this is the Southside Aquatic Center. Any questions on page 67? Anything on page 68? Anything on page 69? Okay. And now lines pool is on page 70. Are there any questions on regarding the lines pool? Page 70. Any questions on page 71? Okay, so the next we'll go to pages 84 and 85, the Cowan Sportsplex. That's page 84. Are there any questions on page 84? And hearing none, are there any on page 85? Oh, sorry. Councillor Schadenberg.
Yeah, through to Emma, I guess, from our Madam Chair. Just the walking track above the indoor soccer pitch. What's sort of the I guess, timetable or to get that fully going again, and what kind of revenue might be expected from that? We've talked lots about gymnasium and indoor soccer and whatnot, but the walking track seems to be something we haven't really discussed.
Yeah, for sure. So unfortunately, with the lockdowns, many of the lockdowns have taken place over the winter months when we would see the biggest amount of revenue coming through for our walking track admissions. So hopefully, as this year progresses, we have seen already an increase this year from last year at this date at the end of February. In 2020, we had 27,500 in revenue from walking track, and 2021 was 14,000. But back in 2019, we had 64,000 in revenue. So I do project that as we come out of the pandemic, we definitely hope to see an increase in numbers there. And I will say that our daily walk-ins have been increasing from what they were last year.
Are there any other questions on those, either of those pages? 64, 65, no, I'm sorry, 84 or 85? Oh, Councillor Accioni.
Thank you. Through the chair to Emma, I'm just assuming here that the Cowan Park admissions of $70,000 includes like the programming, the programs. It's all under that one lump sum. I just noticed we don't have any for revenue for programs for next year.
Yeah, through Madam Chair to the councillor's question. So yes, the program budget is being moved back under the recreation program line. So all of the programs that we run at Cowan Park are fall under the admissions line. So that includes the walking track, our pickleball programs, our parent and tot drop-in times, those types of programs there.
Okay, and if I may, through the chair, to continue the advertising. Are we not pulling any more revenue? Because I know I'm in there to watch my nephews play, and I know there's signage and everything up and around the track. Are there any more spaces available for the public should know about?
Yeah, through Madam Chair to the councillor's question, definitely we're always looking for more advertising, and a lot of them come up on an annual basis. We don't like to budget that we're going to certainly get it. It's usually a nice bonus, but we'll definitely be striving to get some advertising money this year as well.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Thank you. We'll move on to the special events, page 101 to 104. So first, page 101, are there any questions on that page? Page 102, are there any questions on that page? Page 103, any questions on that page? And page 104, any questions on that page? Now we can move on to Mr. Jansen, the special events year in review.
There we go. Hello, everybody. Obviously, due to the pandemic, we were unable to hold any events in the spring and for the most of the summer of 2021. That being said, I was in conversation at one point with our contact with Toyota, who were quite eager to help provide some funding to anything that we might have in mind. And thus, on September 17th, we partnered up and were able to put on a fabulous fireworks display. Like all the events that the city of Woodstock orchestrates, it was all inclusive, families invited. It gives us the opportunity to thank our essential and frontline workers, and that seemed to be a very appreciated theme. It gives us also the opportunity to showcase Cowan Fields, because unless you're a ball player or have young ones that take advantage of the splash pad, I'm sure there was a lot of our citizens hadn't ventured out that way. So it certainly gives us the opportunity to show what a marvelous facility that was. And that venue, with consultation with Mr. Connors and others in the Parks Department, because it wasn't my first choice, but it seemed to be the choice that made the most sense. The venue afforded us the opportunity to use the biggest pyrotechnics available, meaning that we call them the big bangers. We kind of planted them down at the, would be the east north corner of the facility, kind of back into the field there. And it allowed, even with the fire zone, allowed all the people that visited the facility that night to socially distance appropriately, which we certainly encouraged. The surrounding businesses and facilities were very excited and cooperative. We had permission from the church and the school nearby. We, as a courtesy, dropped off some flyers and some of the residents around the area to let them know what to expect. And you didn't have to be at the venue itself to enjoy them, because we had limited parking there. So that was part of our marketing strategy to say, hey, by all means, you can see this in a reasonable area close to Cowan Fields. Families were eager to get outside. It was evidenced by the significant crowds that we gathered. And we worked closely with the city departments, of course, fire primarily, police auxiliary. The movement church came out and helped us orchestrate the parking. So it was a very successful event, and I think everybody was just appreciative to get outside. Okay. Remembrance Day, we worked hard once again and hand in hand with Legion Branch 55, and Ash and I attended a number of meetings there using the template that we had created back when, well, it'd be 2020, I guess, because 21 was, or not 21 rather, but 20 was held indoors at Goff Hall. Very well attended. Once again, I think people were just eager to get outside, and they were responsible and a very appreciative crowd, and paid tribute to those that gave the ultimate sacrifice and that are still serving. Work closely once again with Parks, Works, and Transit. Lighting Museum Square happened November 19th. A little bit of a different spin this year because there was no Santa Claus parade, which is traditionally orchestrated that same weekend. So the Lighting Museum Square is actually used to tee up the event the next day. But due to the restrictions, once again, we held it at our beautiful Museum Square. We weren't able to hand out hot chocolate or cookies for obvious reasons. And so we thought we'd make a big splash because there was no parade the night after. So Santa and Mrs. Claus actually made a cameo, and it was exciting for all the young families, and there was a lot of them there. The evening was quite lovely weather-wise, and so I don't know how to put a number on how many people were there, but it was pretty significant. And the entertainment was provided by the WCI Voices, their choir, and led everybody through a sing-song, and then the Ingersoll Pipe Band lined up around the fountain, the Petula Fountain, and give us about a 20 to 25-minute performance. It was a beautiful night, large crowds, and it was a kickoff, unofficial kickoff to the Christmas season in Woodstock. The decoration exchange, because the health unit is continuing to use Goff Hall. We held that at the Reeves Community Center at the Sportsplex. Wasn't sure how that was going to fly because it's a little bit out of the way, but didn't seem to make a whole lot of difference. It's a wonderful program that was first introduced through the Winter Lights program, which was a spinoff, of course, of Communities in Bloom. And everybody goes to the attic or the garage and finds some gently used kind of unwanted Christmas decorations that other families certainly appreciate. So it's a simple but popular event. And if we have to have it out there again, we certainly will. We've proven that it can work out there. And so we'll see what next year brings. The Santa Claus Parade, this is everyone had followed because of the easing of some of the restrictions. A lot of communities in and around us were deciding to put on some form of a Christmas parade because once again, everybody's itching just to get outside. So the easing of restrictions allowed us to do that. And I had a conversation with Mr. Curry about the attempts to do so. We inherited the financials and a lot of the organizing notes from the previous incarnation of a committee. And so we put it together in about 5 weeks or less. As mentioned, we took the ball from the previous group, which had effectively disbanded. We recruited a small, dedicated group of alpha volunteers, as I call them, with a common goal, meaning everybody that was involved are doers. And we had to cut to the chase and got right to it. And it was amazing. It was a really kind of inspiring group to be with because we had community members and business leaders came out of the woodwork to offer different amenities that made the parade the success that it was. The weather was great that day. The crowds were fantastic. There was the 19th parade I've orchestrated. I've never seen one, so I'm just going by what everybody tells me. We had between 85 and 90 entries, as well as volunteer walkers promoting social distancing, mask wearing, and washing of hands, and the feedback was very positive. And I don't think anyone regrets having been a part of it, but it was certainly something that was required, just bringing people together, watching the smiles on their faces, and it was a good time had by all. From the communications perspective, the magazine remains the go-to publication for Woodstonians looking for information on what's happening in our community. Now, during the pandemic, we really leaned on and utilized the magazine to promote recommended direction from Southwestern Public Health, as well as positive messaging on everything from shopping local, celebrating essential and frontline workers, appropriate behaviors, and we used the magazine to generate that messaging and steer the narrative and get it out to over 21,000 homes, which we do 9 times out of the year. External revenues were down simply because a lot of our regular advertisers just didn't have a whole lot to promote. Internal revenues met projections as our city departments used the book to promote and educate the public on the status of their operations. Editorial content remained topical and relevant. We started this time last year celebrating Woodstock's Black history, and then we focused on shop local and the appreciation of our essential and frontline workers. And we also ran a 4-part series to educate the public, in particular the newer families and people to our community, on the 2-tier governance, featuring editorial on how our local government works, who's in charge of waste management, how does the water systems work, streets, who's responsible for this and that. And that seemed to be very appreciative and well received. As mentioned, it was just more of an educational piece, but even lifelong Woodstonians, I think there was something in there for something that they probably didn't realize. 2021 wasn't without its challenges, including the loss of one of our colleagues and our main writer, Jeff Culp, unfortunately passed in the latter part of November. And this publication has become an institution in our community. It's, I think, celebrated 25 or 26 years. It nicely fits into our overall communications and marketing strategies, which will be expanded this year. And over the past couple of years, we've closely monitored, especially through the pandemic, we monitored several other municipalities, mostly larger, to see how they have navigated and disseminated information during the pandemic. And we stack up quite nicely, providing up-to-date and relevant information. And so the social media platforms that we currently utilize are Facebook and Twitter. And we have been talking to other groups to expand that to cover other social media platforms moving forward. And that's my presentation.
Thank you, Brad. Are there any questions? Brad's budget is on page 99. Councillor Accioni, please.
Thank you. Through the chair to Brad. Actually, I don't have any questions. Just want to say thank you. I mean, really, for all the years, everything you've done, this last couple of years, I know have been quite a chore, and just sorry to see you leave, truth be told. So hopefully, as long as you found your replacement before you leave, I mean, it's your responsibility, isn't it? You got to find them. And somebody just as good with a good voice and everything.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, I think we all feel that way about you, Brad. Sorry to see you go, but you're moving on for retirement and bigger and better things. So thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on that page? Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask Laird Crooks to come back. He had one more slide he would wishes to show us. So he go ahead, Laird.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First off, my sincere apologies to council for forgetting to do the last addition to base, which is the corporate one. I will walk through that quickly. In spring of last year, the corporation did acquire the services of ML Consulting to conduct a comprehensive review of our, when we say administrative, it's the non-union staff salary structure and program. The consultant was tasked with taking a review of the policy, ensuring anything new put in would be compliant with pay equity legislation, review internally and externally in terms of developing a new salary structure. The consultant did introduce a new job evaluation system to ensure the internal equity and pay equity compliance, and then proceeded to do a comparator of a number of municipalities to see where the wages came out compared to others. And that has all been developed. That is now something that potentially we could move forward on with council's approval. So staff are recommending that the council approve this new salary administrative structure, and that any changes in wages would be retroactive to January 1st of this year. And that the wages increases would be that people would go to the same relative position they were in the old structure. So if you were already at the maximum of the old structure, you would move to the maximum of the new structure, with the exception that the increase could not be more than 5%. And if it was more than 5%, then each year we would do a maximum of 5% to get the person up to where they were initially in the old structure. And quite frankly, a lot of this is trying to mitigate the cost and not too much of an impact in the first year. And as indicated in here, we are estimating the cost for 2022 at about $90,000 and then about $80,000 for 2023.
Thank you, Laird. And are there any questions through to Laird regarding his slide? Okay, we'll go on now to Ms. Humphreys, our city clerk, for her presentation.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Lauder. Let me just share my screen here for you. Okay, can everyone see that okay? Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of council. It is my pleasure to present you with the 2022 Revenue Fund budget for the Clerk's Department. So as council may recall, in previous years, I always start my presentation with some stats from the previous year. These are stats that I track within my group, just to understand what our workload capacities are looking like, what kind of trends we're seeing in the department. However, this year I'm actually going to skip this step. To be honest, these stats tend to be a little misleading without context behind them. So for example, our vital statistics revenue is down, as for extended periods in 2021, we were not able to perform weddings here in our council chambers. Similarly, license revenues are down as lottery licenses were significantly impacted by the pandemic. But on the flip side of that, our committee of adjustment revenue, the minor variance revenue, was up significantly. But that's likely due to more minor renovations happening during the pandemic, sheds and covered porches and things like that. So I will continue to track these over the years. But when I look at them, I'm actually going to be taking 2020 and 2021 out of them so I can assess what those true trends are. So I think I'll save that for next year as a plan. But I will point out for 2021, our crossing guard budget, it is significantly under budget. When we have these school closures and students and teachers are required to pivot to online learning, unfortunately, our crossing guards do get laid off. So at this time last year, when we were doing the budget, we knew we had some layoffs and were able to account for that. But as you'll likely recall, school closures continued on significantly longer than a couple of weeks in January. So we have accommodated for the 2 weeks of layoff our guards had at the beginning of this year. So that's included in the 2022 budget. But it does look a little bit funny without that context because we were significantly under budget. But then you see our 2022 numbers actually go up. So just keep in mind for 2021, we did see some significant layoffs with that group, unfortunately. And one more 2021 note, this will be the last year for revenues for our dog tag program. Effective January 1st, 2022, we have officially discontinued that program. So that will go away as of next year's budget. So a couple of notes for the 2022, specifically the 2022 budget. We are once again talking about general liability insurance. And council may remember this from the last 2 previous years as well. That general liability piece is reflected specifically in my budget, and there is an increase there of 16%. There's also actually an increase of transit and auto of 20%. That does not show in my budget. So transit, for example, would be reflected in Mr. DeHaan's budget, for example. So 3rd year in a row, we are experiencing quite a large increase in this line. And that's caused by what's known as a hard market in the insurance industry. And it is driving major increases for municipalities. Now, believe it or not, 16% is a big number, don't get me wrong. However, in comparison to many other municipalities in Ontario, our number is actually significantly lower. So this 16%, believe it or not, is good news. Oxford County, for example, you may have heard had an over 30% increase for 2022. Our friends in Norfolk County had over a 30% increase. Friends in Chatham-Kent were closer to a 40% increase. So Woodstock's performance in terms of claims and different analysis that the insurance company does over the years is quite strong. So again, believe it or not, 16% is actually a good news story. But again, there is a big increase there, and it's worth mentioning. We also, what you'll see in the budget, the actual overall increase is higher than 16% because we always allow for some room in that budget for additional coverage that's needed throughout the year. So if we buy new equipment, if we take on new buildings, those types of things, we need to have the funds there to ensure those. So for example, last year we would have taken over the Grand Street building when Hydro One sort of officially vacated that. So we need to have proper insurance on those buildings. This year we might see a little bit of a rebate. We currently have insurance on the old Dairy Capital building and the jewelry store. If those are demolished this year, then we'll be able to cancel that insurance. But we do see some fluctuation in this budget line because of those things. Now, secondly, for 2022, of course, we are administering a municipal and school board election in 2022. Now, the election is a little bit funny on the clerk's department budget because in the year of an election like this, it actually skews the budget to look like we've got sort of this big increase in expenditures. And then the year after the election, it's the opposite. And it looks like we've had this big decrease in expenditures and pulled all this cost out. So this year it looks a bit rough. Next year it looks really great. But really it's that sort of fluctuation that we see. And then we have 2 status quo years. But every election cycle, we will see this sort of up and down. So as council may recall, what we do each year is we actually contribute some money into an election reserve. So we take what we expect the election to cost, divide it by 4, and every year we contribute that amount to the reserve. So what you'll see in our revenue section is us drawing the funds out of that reserve to help fund the election. And we do that, those contributions to help smooth that impact to the levy over a course of the 3-year, 4-year cycle. So there's a corresponding expenditure to the actual revenue as well. So it's meant to balance itself out. Now, one other item that's not included specifically in that election expense line is, as council may recall, in the fall, they pre-approved an election coordinator position for us. He started last week, so we're really excited. That's going to be a lot of help for the administration. But that amount is actually included in our clerk's department wages line, because there's other costs associated with that staff member that need to be accounted for, like CPP and EI and such. So that's actually included, although it's an election cost, it's included in the department wages. So with that being said, these two items, the insurance and the election, actually account for almost the entire increase in expenditures in the clerk's budget. So although the budget booklets that you received show a 9.17% increase for my group, if you take out the insurance increase, which is somewhat out of our control, and take that election piece out, we're actually looking at a 0.3% or a $5,870 increase for 2022. So although it doesn't look that way, this is actually very much a status quo budget from the clerk's department for this year. Now, with that being said, we do have an addition to the base budget. We are asking council for a clerk services coordinator position to be added to our department. Now, the number of staff members in the clerk's department has not been increased since 1987. At the risk of dating myself, I was in kindergarten and our deputy clerk was not born. But with that being said, the staff in the department 35 years ago didn't even have computers, realistically. So as an entirely administrative department, we've been able to manage significant growth in our workload through the introduction of technology over the past 3 decades. Further, as council may recall, we've done some department service reviews in recent years, and we've done that to try to increase our ability to absorb more workload. However, we are now at the point where the department's volume of work has outpaced our staffing level. We're really struggling to manage the increased volume, and we find that we can no longer meet our previous levels of service that other staff, as well as members of the public, have come to expect from us. We also find ourselves in a very reactive state when things come up, as we've lost our ability to proactively review and update things like policies, procedures, bylaws, or to introduce any new incentives. So as such, we are respectfully requesting council's consideration of the addition of this new position to our department. And with that, Madam Chair, that's the extent of my presentation, if there are any questions.
Thank you. The pages 110 through to 113 are the budget for the clerk's department. Do you have any questions on page 110? Anything on 111 or 112? And that's it, I guess. So hearing none, we'll proceed now to Mr. Slager, the fire department, pages 51 and 52 of your agenda.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll just bring up our presentation. Okay, I'm hoping everyone can see our presentation is up. We're good. All right, so as with everybody else, we'll kind of kick off our 22 presentation with just a brief review of 2021. I promise not to go on long. One of our more significant pieces that we achieved last year was the purchase and receipt of our new aerial apparatus. I'm sure you've seen it driving around town. It's a beautiful piece of equipment. We're very pleased to have it in our fleet. It's probably one of the first ones we've had with a nice black ladder on the top of it. It's very striking when you see it out there, and has a very unique siren. Some people I've heard kind of the air raid siren is what the comparison of it is too. It's very distinctive when you hear us coming down the street, but hopefully it brings notice to us and you get out of the way and let us go about our duty. In general overview, we had 2 retirements, or a retirement of 1 captain last year, and we had 2 probationary firefighters join our department. The retirements, or the probationary firefighters, came from previous year retirements. We held off with COVID and everything kind of processing through for replacements. The captain retired later in 2021, and a new probationary firefighter joined us in January of this year as that replacement. COVID response, just like everybody else, has been ongoing, continues to provide some challenges for our ability to continue to provide our service, both in the public and in the hall, and also just additional costs for maintaining the safety and security of staff and what we do outside. The Rail Safety Improvement Program, I was hoping that I'd be able to have kind of some information from last year, or that we had received the grant and we were moving forward on it. However, we are still waiting for the 2022 announcement with the application that we put through. So still pending, still fingers crossed. Fire prevention and education of last year, our crews were able to move a bit more beyond what the restrictions that we had in the previous year, became a bit more adept with our virtual tours. We had a lot more interaction with classes and community groups, being able to set up cameras on the wheel floor, have the involvement of our firefighters showing off a lot of the equipment. It kind of minimized or eliminated the concern of touch or cross-contamination, I guess you could say, of transfer with anybody coming through and seeing things, but still allowed us to reach out and be in contact with numerous groups, and a direct opportunity for kids to still have that ask a firefighter a question and get an immediate reply for them. So it was a lot of work from our education division there, and Lisa's done a great job at keeping that going for us. We were able to get out in the public a fair bit now that the commercial opportunities or commercial occupancies have opened, and get be out there, provide some information, continue back with what we were doing. With COVID, again, everything went virtual, social media. We continue to increase our use of it, and a steady flow of information. Anybody that does follow any of our pages is used to seeing regular output from our prevention and education teams. The inspection front, our vulnerable occupancies, we're still able to maintain and complete all of the required inspections and observations of fires drills here in the city. We had 14 fire investigations, now classified as those that required our on-call investigator to attend. Of those 14, we had the Office of the Fire Marshal and Emergency Management attend for 2 of them. That's where they hit the criteria where we have to notify them, and they attend to assist with. We were also able to have a return to in-person inspections, whereas the previous year we had kind of tried to adapt to virtual ones, which did limit the ability for us to go through. But now with the in-person ones with safe PPE on for both the residents and our inspectors, we're able to go back into that. We still have the ability to offer virtual if it's a minor setup, but there's nothing that beats a practical inspection if we can complete that. With our incident responses, when we go through, rather than go through everything, I kind of gave a breakdown of the nature of them. We had a total of 1,280 responses last year in 2021. 113 of those were fire-related response, containing both loss or no loss fire incidents. False fire alarm responses, we had 337 of those. Those can range from the failure of equipment to somebody accidentally setting off an alarm, a call of concern for carbon monoxide and it turning out to be nothing. So it does include a range of responses of some of the ones where we'd rather them be safe than sorry and ignore it and kind of go through. They're not all malicious, and they're not all kind of they shouldn't have happened type of thing. So I do want to kind of hit that because it is a bit of a high number. Our public hazardous response or hazard responses, 73. Those are gas leaks, that type of thing, fuel spills that we get out to. Rescue responses, 224. That will range anything from a motor vehicle incident where we may be charged with going to for assisting with extrication or just assisting in disabling the vehicles, to helping get somebody out of a trapped elevator. So a broad range of incidents that cover underneath of that. 224 responses last year. 394 medical responses, the type of responses in the name there of all vein of medical type of a setup that we have. As first responders, we take pride in those. And 53 calls that fall underneath of the assisting other agency or a response was canceled. So there may be some instances where we're called to assist our local police agencies, our local medical agencies, if they're outside of a medical response type call, or an incident that while we're en route, it gets downgraded and our response is no longer needed. However, we have been dispatched and it doesn't classify as anything else because it doesn't fit in that bill. It's just a canceled call. When we move into our 2022 for the proposed budget, Laird Crooks did touch on it when he did his HR presentation that we are within the midst of negotiations with the Firefighter Association. So salary projections for 2022 are not included in our calculations. Those are calculated elsewhere within the city presentations. So our 2022 expenditure changes, if we're looking at things that are directly related to staffing, so salaries and benefits, you can see some of the changes that we've got over last year. Some of the more significant ones, the salaries regular and the OMERS, those changes are directly related to the retirement of a captain, where we have a significant wage set up there of 116%. And then when we're bringing in probationary firefighters, again, at a lower rate. So when we have 2 probationary firefighters offsetting 2 captains, we're going from 116% of a first-class firefighter wage to 60% of a first-class firefighter wage. So there is a significant difference when it comes to that. Our salaries, we have bumped, or overtime, sorry, we have bumped that up. We did hit a significant impact, as we'll get to, as you can kind of compare to last year's amount due to COVID and some other overtime expenses. We've seen that trending over the past number of years. So we have increased that allotment for us with that. But in all other areas with respect to wages, you don't see anything really significant other than just dealing with standard areas that we aren't in control of, CPP and EI, and health benefits as they continue going through for mandating or meeting the contractual obligations. Fitting into the areas that of overall for expenditure changes. So everything calculated on the previous page is under the wages and benefit. So you see an overall decline of $105,000, 270 with respect to that. The next 2 categories are the ones that I kind of have direct control over. Supplies, repairs, and maintenance, that's for the day-to-day operation of our service. We continue to do a review of how things are moving, what changes that we've got, and we'll detail some of the changes in the coming slides. We do see a reduction of $22,000 on the year for that. The increase in the dispatch, emergency preparedness, and reserves, the increase of $50,000 is specifically in our reserves for fire apparatus. And again, I will touch on that in the coming slides. When we look at the overall change from 2021 to 2022 with respect to our budget, we are down $77,270, a drop of 0.8%. When we add everything through, looking at the tax levy, the fire department portion, for the first time in a while, again, excluding the fact that we do have wages that will come into effect in retro upon contractual, once the negotiations are complete, we are at 14.8% of the tax levy for the fire service, which is about on par with how we have been operating for the past number of years. When we do a review of the changes to our base budget, looking at the reductions, the areas that we were able to continue to monitor, view for trends, and see where we can withdraw some money. Mileage, we continue to withdraw or monitor what our usage is. We're dropping another $1,000 off of that. A significant portion of this comes into play as a number of years ago, a staff vehicle was provided for day-to-day operation at the fire service, thereby limiting the need for a personal vehicle use by our deputy and the associated mileage costs that go with that. And again, in the past couple of years, we don't see a lot of travel that's been going on outside of in-personal vehicles, so we continue to monitor there. Subscriptions and memberships, this account we were able to drop relatively significant with respect to that. And some changes there, monitoring what our overall expenses are. NFPA is a significant charge that we go through. They've changed the format of documentation that they go, now they're strictly online. We just purchase items where we need to. Uniforms, when we're looking at that, we have a drop of $5,000 there in the sense that we review the quality and the control of what we need to issue to staff. And through the ongoing basis of that, we're able to drop again the allotment that we were required for there. Purchase services, a drop of $10,000. This is a bits and pieces off of a number of things that come through with it. In some cases, it is an area of where we've been able to negotiate better prices for certain services that we do undertake on an annual basis. The truck maintenance and repairs, this is kind of a bit of part of the, I don't want to say the shuffle game with funds. We are at the point now where the majority of our fire apparatus are newer and also purchased through and maintained by manufacturers that are currently in service. The biggest challenge that we've had for the past number of years is that the majority of our apparatus were American LaFrance based equipment, and American LaFrance has been out of business for a number of years, obtaining replacement parts for servicing that very difficult and very expensive. And as they were reaching their end of life and age, the need for replacement parts increases and jacks that up. With the availability of new purchases and easy access to newer equipment or newer parts, we've been able to drop our requirements for the truck maintenance and cost repairs there. However, I do want to draw council's attention in the coming slides. I am moving that money somewhere else. Our telephone review, again, through negotiations and the involvement of the IT department with some of the phone plans that the city has been able to obtain for cellular and such like that, we've been able to obtain better rates, better costs, and drop our telephone charges down in that account to drop at $5,500. So now when we look at areas where we're seeing increases, and again, very limited for some growth, our general insurance, as Amy was mentioning, the last one, insurance is going up. We do try to monitor that and see where things go. As rates kind of change, or as we get expectations may exceed, or realities may exceed expectations, but we'll find that out kind of at the end of the year, unfortunately. In our educational courses and training account, there was an increase from $15,000, but I put an asterisk beside this because this was a little bit of a change. If we recall at last year's base budget presentation, we actually, our standard amount that we've always had in that account for the past while has been $20,000. When we were reviewing the challenges that the city was facing due to the reductions of income and such like that due to COVID, and also some of our staffing challenges that we had, we dropped $15,000 off of that account as a one-time cost savings measure for the 2021 year. Shortly thereafter, we did receive a one-time grant from the Office of the Fire Marshal in the amount of $14,600, which almost completely replaced that. So when you do look at the budget line in comparison from last year, the amount that council actually approved was $5,000. We are moving it back up to the $20,000, which was our standard setup, as we are also continuing to hope we will be moving with a full-time training officer back in our position, and there will be continued need for those funds. Our medical oversight and first aid, with the inclusion of our naloxone program and our general review of base hospital through our local paramedic services here, we continue to monitor the number of staff and the services that we need to be certified under, and we're able to see that we need an increase of $1,500 to maintain our certifications for medical response with that. Fire prevention, we're requesting an increase of $3,000 there. The prevention budget has been static for a number of years, back since even I was in that position over 5 years ago now. And again, as they've continued to expand into new technologies to be able to reach out to new sources of education, but also completing different aspects of their job, we're just looking at providing a few more funds to be able to achieve that. Water, a minor drop there. We're continuing to monitor the use of on the expense in this field as we're underneath of the new hall and what the usage would be there. For the provisions of fire equipment reserves, this is where we're moving some of that $30,000 that I wanted to pull out of the truck maintenance. My view there was, rather than using it annually to repair the vehicles that hopefully we don't need to as often, we are seeing a very drastic increase in the cost of replacement vehicles. So the intent behind this is to increase our base contribution for the provision of fire equipment reserves from the $325,000 that has been the standard, bumping it up to the $375,000. So a bit of a shell game there with the funds within the fire service budget. So with that, that is my presentation of the direction that we're going with our funds, and I'll leave it open for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions through to the fire chief? First, looking at page 51. Councillor Tate.
Just an overall question, and just want to confirm again with the chief that because there was no firefighters added this year, that they will be added in the future because of the growth. And I'm just concerned that we are adequately manned at this time.
Madam Chair, through to Councillor Tate, this is an area that we are undertaking one of a couple of studies that we're looking through. We, as CEO Curry has mentioned in previous ones, the city does have to continue to monitor our growth with respect to placement of stations, the growth of into a third station at some point, because we do have significant growth on the north side, and that will also contribute to additional staffing just in multiple areas for staffing a third station, but also looking at the level of services that we need to maintain. So we are going to, the intent is to have a very detailed presentation for council. It was just in discussions. This was probably not the appropriate opportunity to bring this forward. And for anybody that knows me, I like to have very detailed information to give to be able to justify my position on this aspect. So you will see something from us in the future.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other questions on page 51? Turning over to page 52, are there any questions there? Thank you, Jeff, for your presentation. Now we'll go to the administrative services. Ms. Campbell.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Lauder and members of council. I'll be presenting pages 1 to 14 of the budget. I'll just get my screen up here. Okay, is that showing properly? Yes, thank you. Okay, as I mentioned last week at the council meeting, this pie chart shows the total revenues that are composed in the budget. The majority of our revenue, as we mentioned, comes from taxation. There are some lower revenues estimated again this year in a number of areas that are directly attributable to COVID, including some of the user fees and gaming revenues. They're similar to 2021, but they are a little bit lower. And we are continuing as well to benefit from a variety of grants that are offered, but the volume of those grants is decreasing as well as the value into 2022. So the first sort of page of the budget, it includes all of the revenues that benefit the city as a whole. They're not attributable to any specific departments, and so they're all gathered together in one spot. They include taxation, penalty and interest charges on taxation, grant revenues, and contributions from the various reserve and reserve funds. Of particular note in 2021 is our additional tax number. They were exceptional in 2021, not partially attributable to the growth, but I think also maybe a little bit focused by impact to give us a little bit of a helping hand. The additional taxes are billed throughout the year based on supplementary and omitted tax rolls that are received through the months of May to November. Because it was such an exceptional year, we have budgeted 2022 conservatively, and we based it on a 5-year average from 2016 to 2020. It is difficult to predict how much new assessment will be captured by impact in any given year, but this average does roughly correspond to the preliminary new growth estimate that they recently provided to us. So we're fairly comfortable with that number. In addition, the tax penalty and interest returned to more normal levels in 2021 after there was some relief afforded in 2020. And although the 2021 actual is above the budget, we've left it the same as we're anticipating the resolution of a number of delinquent accounts during 2022. The slot machine revenue always gets a little bit of special attention when we're talking about the budget. So this year it's no different. We are going to Based on the council policy, we're going to continue the same allocation as previous years, which is the hospital building campaign of $350,000 the final year. Community grants of $230,050. We always bring in an amount to benefit our taxpayers. This year is $460,100, and then the balance we contribute to the capital program. So what we've done, because of the reduction in the slot machine money due to there was both closures and restrictions at the local facility during 2021, is we mirrored what we did in the 2021 budget. And in effect, we have supplemented the amount that we did receive through the slot machine sharing of the profit to with the balance of the safe restart money that we received for general purposes in 2021. And we're going to use that to fund our grant and budget funding programs. Basically uses up most of the safe restart funding, but it does allow us the opportunity to continue with our grant funding and our final payment out to the hospital. There's also the fair program is funded through the grant program as well, and that shows up in the recreation budget. We have bumped that back up to $30,000 this year. Last year it was reduced to $15,000, but we're going back to a pre-pandemic funding level in the hope that there will be more programs available to be offered this year. My next slide is about some of the expenditures, similar to the revenue, expenditures that are not directly attributable to specific departments. And most of them are similar to the previous year. We have a number of boundary adjustment payments that we are now making in perpetuity to 4 of the lower tier municipalities within Oxford. And they're all different based on the boundary adjustment agreements that were signed into place when the adjustments took place. The payments do amount to almost 1.7% of the expenditures in the budget as presented. It's a little bit less than last year as the amount that we're paying into Blandford Blenheim has been reduced. Charitable rebates are consistent year over year. There's no anticipated changes in 2022. They're paid to eligible charities upon submission of a completed application, and they apply to charities that rent property and pay taxes at a commercial rate. And the rebate at 40% is meant to approximate a residential tax rate, as that's how a property is assessed if a charity owns their property. The Community Improvement Program continues to be a popular program amongst downtown businesses. It's made up of several components. There's grants for a portion of expenses incurred on the project. You can get permit fees back, tax back grants, and as well there are 10-year interest-free loans available through the program. We do have a number of approved applications that still need to be finalized. So the budget numbers reflect that there are a number of approved projects already that may be completed in the year, but we just haven't received the paperwork for them yet. And as well, we do include an estimate for projects that might be approved and finished during 2022. And that program is fully funded by the Downtown Redevelopment Reserve Fund. The 2021 tax adjustments were equally as exceptional as the additional taxes as a result of the settlement of a very large 9-year appeal. We've been able to reduce that budget estimate for 2022. However, we're now in a position where we need to replenish our reserve, which was entirely exhausted in 2021. So we haven't brought it down maybe as low as we normally would in the hope that at the end of the year, any leftover funds can be contributed back into our tax adjustment reserve so that we have a bit of a cushion for future appeals in future years. We do still have a few multi-year property appeals outstanding, as well as several 1- and 2-year appeals that hopefully they'll settle out. Maybe we'll get them mostly caught up before the next reassessment is in place. With respect to the reserve and reserve fund contributions, they're quite similar to previous years. As noted at Thursday's council meeting, the contribution for the sick leave reserve was eliminated this year, as that reserve is now fully funded based on payout estimates. We did have a special contribution of surplus to the asphalt reserve contribution, asphalt resurfacing reserve last year, and this year it's been returned to the base budget amount. The contribution to the salary reserve has been reduced, as we did have a couple of contracts that we settled out last year that have been now the retroactive payments have been completed. And we're just currently waiting on one expired contract that if it settles out, we'll have funds available to make it whole in 2022. And there will be a list of the reserve and reserve funds available shortly. It's not quite ready yet as we're still working on our year end, but we will bring that to council once it's available. Within our own Department of Administrative Services, we've had a particularly busy year preparing for the retirement of our former treasurer and working hard to transfer a lot of knowledge to other staff and download 40 years of Treasury Department history. We also filled a couple of the resultant vacancies, and unfortunately there is still one vacancy that we're working to fill, but hopefully we'll have that done in the next few weeks. We were able to fill the part-time taxation clerk position that was approved in the 2021 budget late last year, and we are very appreciative of council and the extra hours that are available for both training and transition purposes. We are still working on succession plans within our department, and we're also trying to reduce some overtime expenses in 2022. We've also had the opportunity to have a high school cooperative education student work with us. She was here in the fall and she's come back for the winter semester. And that's been a mutually beneficial experience and has helped to fill a few of the gaps that we've experienced from the vacancy that was previously mentioned. We continue to stay busy with our daily operations related to taxation, accounting, purchasing, and reporting. And in addition, we maintain the inventory of the city assets. In terms of achievements, we used the $50,000 Federation of Canadian Municipalities grant that we received last year to update building information on 3 of our older municipal buildings in preparation for the 2024 asset management plan. And we've now used our tax bill eSend program successfully for 3 tax billings. And in January, we sent out just over 2% of our bills by email. So we will continue to ramp up with that. We need to improve a little bit of the communications related to the program, as people signed up and were surprised to get the bill by email and wondered why. But we will get that rectified for the next, when we do our final billing. And we're happy to advise that sign-up forms are available on our website and at City Hall. We also received a Municipal Modernization grant during the year, and we're in the process of implementing virtual City Hall, which will provide taxpayers and residents of the city with limited self-serve access to taxation and assessment-related information once it's launched. We're just finalizing some security issues surrounding the software before we roll that out. We did successfully implement a number of taxation information fees for the first time in 2021, which resulted in over $6,000 of new revenue. And that was basically for providing duplicate information to people that where it had already been provided and it was just not, it wasn't filed properly or whatever, and they were requesting the information again. We started to charge for some of the duplication. We successfully delivered the 2022 to 2026 capital budget and forecast with FMW software, and we eliminated the use of the former platform. And unfortunately, our FMW operating budget will remain a work in progress for another year, as it did get sidelined as a result of the staffing changes that occurred in our department. But we will be hoping to move forward with that next year. In terms of goals for 2022, some of our 2021 goals, unfortunately, are still in progress. We'll continue into 2022. We're currently working with bylaw to launch a new parking ticket system to facilitate both the tracking and payment of tickets, and just to update our very antiquated system that we currently use. And that works ongoing now. We also are hoping to make some improvements within the city website to our administrative services portion of the website, just to provide additional information to people. And that training of staff has been completed, and we'll be moving forward with some suggestions on what we want to update. We would still like to work with our engineering office to improve the cash receipting and avoid some duplication of data entry that occurs between engineering and City Hall. And we will be assisting with the completion of the 2022 asset management plan for core assets, which will be coming to council before the summertime this year. And as we move towards more and more online payments, we will be completing an audit to ensure we are compliant with the rules of the payment card industry. With respect to the debt, our current debt at the end of 2021 is just under $15 million. We have been financing a portion of our debt from development charges, which speaks to the growth in the city and the new things that we're building that are as a result of the explosion of the population. In 2021, we issued $600,000 of debt related to road work, and as well as the $775,000 that was related to the acquisition of the Dundas Street property next door to City Hall. We anticipate that we may issue up to $1.6 million in 2022, which includes the usual $900,000 for roads, as well as there's 2 approved road projects from 20 and 2021 that will be sold as well this year, assuming that the projects are finished. This slide just provides a breakdown of the debt by function, which includes 33.6% for police and fire, 44% for the roads, works and engineering, 13.2% for rec and culture, and the balance is industrial land purchase and the purchase of the Dundas Street property next door. The grants we mostly covered with the slot machine revenue. At the end of this budget, we have a net expenditure of $98,840. It's an additional grant that was approved for the Southgate Centre during 2015 and now has been indexed beginning in 2021. This is the only portion of that budget that is not financed from slot machine revenues. And the Oxford Naval Vets property continues to be returned on the roll as taxable. We've questioned that and it remains a grant for now. And finally, the other buildings, that's just a variety of city-owned facilities and associated expenses to maintain and operate them. There will likely be changes with the majority of these properties in 2022. Expect that the Dundas Street properties will be demolished later in the year, and not sure what will happen with the former Woodstock Hydro building, but it's been vacant since the end of January 2021, as has the west end of the Market Centre. There are some options being considered for both of these buildings. The United Way continues to rent the former gallery building, and we always include in this budget just some general funds for heating, roof, and mason repairs on various city buildings funded out of the Municipal Building Reserve. And lastly, we have no additions this year to our base budget. So that wraps up my presentation, and I would be pleased to entertain any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Diane. And so we'll start at page 1. Councillor Schadenberg.
Thanks, Madam Chair, to Diane Campbell. I guess my first question on page 1, where it talks about the additional taxes, you talked about additional monies coming in based on new construction, probably, and new assessments. 1.5 million, and it was 2.9 was the actual in 2021, and you're projecting 1.5 again for 2022. Give us an idea as to when a house is built, for example. Let's say somebody asks for a building permit on July 1st, and of course it takes a long time for the house to be built and to be occupied before a tax bill actually goes out to these new homeowners, that we can start recouping tax monies from that. Because you can look at all the building permit reports, and it's a bit of a zigzag from one year to the next, so it's difficult to predict, as you would probably admit, what the final number might be in any calendar year.
Madam Chair, through the councillor's question, quite often it takes 1.5 to 2 years before the property gets picked up. We are working with MPAC, and one of the duties that our new taxation clerk is going to be taking on will be a better tracking of the building permits that are sent to MPAC, so that when the final permit or the occupancy permit is issued, that we're kind of on MPAC right away to get them to pick that extra assessment up, so that it isn't such a long time for taxpayers. We do encourage them to get set up and begin to pay if they'd like, even before the bill is issued, so that it's not such a hardship when it does come out. But unfortunately, there is a bit of a time lag between when they move into a property and when they get their first bill.
If I could follow up then, so retroactively they're sent the bill, say they move in on September 1st, but they don't get their first tax bill, say on December 1st, or heaven forbid early the next year, they retroactively have to pay the taxes back to when they took possession of the property then, Diane?
Yes, that's correct. So they could conceivably get a bill for, like if they built a house in 2021 and we haven't picked it up yet, we won't have supplementary roll until the 1st of May is the first one for 2022. So they could they could be picking up most of 2021 as well as 2022 when they get their first bill, which is why we try to encourage them to get on a plan right away.
Yeah. And just, I looked at the building permit report myself, just as a sidebar here. In 2020, building permits in the city of Woodstock were 522 residential units, 302 single-family homes. So when you start looking at the amount of paperwork and catch up for all these new addresses, it's quite a bit, that's for sure. So compliment your staff on the work they do.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on that page? Page 2. Any questions? Page 3. Page 4. And page 5 is just some totals. Page, just a minute here. Yeah, page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Page 10. And page 11 is just some totals. Page 12. Page 13. And page 14. Hearing none. Thanks, Diane. You got off.
Thank you.
Pretty lucky there.
Yes, very lucky.
Thanks for your presentation. Now we'll move on to the CAO's report on page, that's on page 98. So we'll call on Mr. Creary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am the last on the agenda this evening, and I think that's probably a good thing. It's been a long evening so far. All right, so I will be covering the CAO, the planning budget, which are two relatively small pieces of the budget, but also be picking up a few of the miscellaneous elements of the budget that may not be captured in other presentations. So first to the CAO budget, there's really not much happening in the budget year over year. The wages include the CAO as well as shared costs of the senior administrative assistants to this to CAO mayor. So it's shared with the mayor's office. Year over year, there's really very little difference happening. Legal fees is remaining at 40,000, which is slightly elevated from what it would normally be. And it's a result of some ongoing litigation. This year we have the ongoing HOC, which is the Capitol Theater action, to retrieve the title to the property for non-performance under the sales agreement. We also have an ongoing claim with respect to a minor variance on Crestwood, and then the judicial review for the county transit spheres of jurisdiction. Moving into the planning budget on page 53, you'll notice there is an increase in planning application fee revenue, which is a reflection of the increased development activity in the city. As well, there's a corresponding elevated increase in cost for legal fees and planning services, and that you can see that reflected in the 2021 budget. It's resulting from the planning consultants that are required to represent city council at OLT, hearings that have been ongoing. In 2022, we're proposing to continue a higher than normal expenditure in this area and financing it partially from the remains of the legal fees reserve. The net result of this budget is the $1,000 on the tax levy. So there's really a very small impact on the tax levy for this budget. Moving into the recommendations for additions to base budget, there are 3 traditional reserve contributions that council has seen year over year. And the first is the asphalt resurfacing reserve. And In 2015, the city engineer came to council with a recommendation to increase road resurfacing spending from $1 million a year to $2 million a year. And over this period of time, council has approved $400,000 of funding to be raised on the levy each year. That $400,000 has resulted in the ability to establish ongoing base funding of $1.6 million a year for road resurface spending. So we're not quite at the 2 million, we're getting close. Now that $2 million spending level was a 2015 number. There has been significant inflationary impacts on road rebuilding. So that number would be higher than that today. It's a good question to ask Mr. DeHaan on our Thursday budget meeting session. So there is still more work to do here. Now, to give priority to the staffing requests for additions to base budget, we're recommending that council do a 1-year funding approval of this from the OSIF bump up. And we would allocate that to the road resurfacing budget for this year so that that money can get put into the road program. This doesn't solve the problem on an ongoing basis. It simply elevates the dollars that are available by $200,000 this year for the road resurfacing program. The second is the post-secondary capital grant. We're recommending this be deferred to 2023 as well. This is primarily for what is expected to be a Fanshawe College investment at some point in our future. In the last year or two, Fanshawe did enter into a lease agreement for a downtown property and has opened a new facility in the downtown, and that should relieve some of the overcrowding that's happening at their Finkel Street campus. So it's not a permanent solution, it's a short-term fix. So this is not something that I think should be forgotten. It was an item that was recommended as part of the strategic plan. I think we should keep it in top of mind, but again, to make priority for other additions to base budget, we're recommending deferral. Similarly, the capital levy, council has considered this one on an ongoing basis. And primarily this is debt avoidance for large maintenance related projects. And the example that we've used in the past is the complex roof. And Councillor Schattenberg raised this question earlier this evening. The complex roof is in the capital program for 2025-2026. And it has now escalated to an estimated cost of about $1.8 million. Council has raised through 2 prior budget approvals a total of $200,000 to apply towards this project. So we have a long way to go. Now, I don't want to say that debt is a bad thing. It is not a bad thing. We had to resort to the issuance of debt for the refrigeration replacement project at the community complex. Debt is a necessary element of our financing of our capital program. It is just something that in my preference, it would be used more for growth-related projects rather than for state of good repair for our existing capital assets. Ideally, we would be able to get to an annual funding level that we can sustain the existing capital assets in a state of good repair without needing to resort to debt. But we have a long way to go to get there. So in staffing, there are a few staffing considerations that I want to raise. And the first is the creation of a deputy CAO. This isn't a new full-time position. What is being recommended here is a title change for the city clerk, along with additional responsibilities. Essentially we'll end up with the assignment of additional direct reports to this role, as well as special project assignments that have broad corporate application. Now, my preference is that council not read too much into the need to succession plan for the CAO quite yet, but simply rather that succession planning is a management best practice. And the assignment of direct reports to a deputy CAO will provide an opportunity to get exposure and experience to areas of the corporation that would be otherwise difficult in the role of city clerk. Moving into the manager of marketing and communications. So this was previously a responsibility that was held through the communications and special events manager. With the upcoming retirement of this incumbent in the role, we held a multi-department consultation to consider the current and anticipated future corporate and departmental needs for marketing and communications. So based on this consultation, it became apparent that one staff position cannot serve both marketing and communications as well as special events. So consequently, the special events role has been transferred to the Parks and Recreation Department, and a second position is proposed dedicated to the marketing and communications. This position will be responsible for the development of a communications strategy that results in more community engagement. There is a need to expand our communications to different media platforms, such as video messaging. Instagram is another example. Coordination of marketing communications and pulling more marketing communications from a number of our departments is also necessary. And there's also the potential to make this resource available to the BAA to assist with their member communications in the form of newsletters. Finally, the west end of the market center. We're proposing that the west end of the market center be considered for use as a city hall annex. We're suggesting the levy impact on this would be a modest $10,000, which just represents the additional utilities associated with conditioning the space for heat and cooling. It is currently vacant. It has been vacant since April. Our economic development office has been working to market the property for commercial tenancy, but as can be expected in the middle of a pandemic where work from home is the current environment, there's little interest in commercial rentals. And this, in some respects, is a benefit to us because it's become apparent that the city will likely have need of the space in the very near future. We expect that City Hall will reach capacity this year in terms of being able to accommodate workspace for additional staff. And so we are proposing that that we begin a design exercise this year to look at the renovation of this west end of the market center to be able to use this space for consideration of city departments. Now, what we're proposing immediately in this year is to use a corner of this space for a downtown bylaw enforcement officer. And you'll hear more about this on Thursday with Mr. DeHaan's presentation. We are proposing to create a bylaw enforcement assistant supervisor role who would work out of the market center, given the view that it has over Museum Square, and it would be a downtown bylaw enforcement dedicated office. We are proposing additional funds for downtown security guard for this year for Museum Square as well as the broader downtown area. And this would form a base of operations for the downtown security contract as well as our parking enforcement officer. And it would be all under the supervision of a assistant supervisor of bylaw enforcement. So we're looking to kind of concentrate this resource in the market center. While using this space this year, we would be looking to undertake a concept review as well as moving forward with interior renovations to convert some portions of that West End space into other offices for city departments to consider using next year. We think we can get through this year at City Hall, but by next year we will need additional space. Now, Council will recall that we also have a concept underway as part of the capital program to look at expanding City Hall, and that's still underway. But it remains to be seen whether the expansion of City Hall will produce much in the way of additional office space, or if it will simply correct some of the functional issues that we have with respect to securing the space, public access, public crush space, as well as addressing the council chambers and public washrooms. So we think there is a definite need to give consideration to this as an annex of City Hall. Looking forward, we think there's potential to use the one-story portion of this area, which has public washrooms, to be used as support space for any public events that would be happening in Museum Square. And there is the potential to have the BIA consider using this as well as their primary administration office. The indoor space can also be used as indoor supplemental space to any outdoor events that are going on at Museum Square, such as the regular Thursday markets, if it's raining, or if there's someone who needs electricity or an indoor environment. This would provide that as an opportunity, as well as the successful winter market during the Christmas season that was held in the former Dairy Capital and Jewelry Store could also be held in this facility. So we're suggesting $150,000. Now, this is probably not the final number. I would suggest this is just an initial figure for some fairly minimal interior renovations to convert the space for some additional offices for City Hall staff. So this would probably be a phased number. Whether or not it ends up being a phased project or not, I think remains to be seen. To fully utilize this building, we would need to have an elevator installed so that access to the second floor can be achieved. That will be much more than this $150,000. But I think the design exercise will help us understand whether we should do the entire project in one, or whether or not we can take a stepwise approach to it and do it more phased approach. And finally, there are two options to mitigate the levy increase. I just want to make sure that we cover these. Mr. DeHaan will probably go into more detail about the transit fare increase. But we are also recommending the use of additional dedicated gas tax funding in the amount of $150,000 to help mitigate the year-over-year increase within the transit budget. And with that, Madam Chair, I will turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions on page 98 through to the CAO? The other page is on the planning on page 53. Are there any questions through to the other items that he has brought forward in his presentation? Hearing none. Councillors are requested to forward their suggested amendments to council, the CAO, the city clerk, and the Director of Administrative Services by March the 11th, 2022. Amendments can, of course, be brought forward on the council floor on March the 17th as well. There will be another budget meeting on 5 p.m. February 24th to review the remainder of the departments. And I just would like to thank all the staff for the presentations. They did an excellent job. And I would like to ask for a motion of adjournment. Councillor Petter and second by Councillor Accioni, and all in